The moment my father publicly handed our company to my brother, the SEC already had everything. Not suspicion, not rumors, evidence, signed contracts, wire transfers, shell companies, internal emails. And at exactly midnight, while champagne exploded across the ballroom ceiling and 140 guests screamed "Happy New Year," I pressed send on the final file. My name is Evelyn Sears. I'm 34 years old. And for 14 months, I quietly prepared to destroy the lie my family built around my brother. The strange part? Nobody noticed, not my father, not the board, not even Colton, especially not Colton. Because when people spend their whole lives underestimating you, they stop watching carefully. That was their mistake. The ballroom glittered gold that night. Crystal chandeliers, live band. Black tie guests carrying champagne flutes that probably cost more than my first apartment rent. My father loved theatrical wealth, especially when it involved legacy. Gerald Sears stood center stage in a charcoal tuxedo, holding a microphone in one hand and a champagne glass in the other, like he was accepting a Lifetime Achievement Award instead of preparing to destroy his own company publicly. To family, he announced proudly. The guests raised glasses immediately. To legacy, applause. My husband Nathan sat beside me near the back of the ballroom with one hand resting lightly against my knee beneath the tablecloth. Grounding pressure, steady. Nathan always knew when I was holding tension before I admitted it myself. On stage, my brother Colton grinned beside my father like he already owned the world. Honestly, maybe he thought he did. Perfect tuxedo, perfect smile, perfect rich boy confidence carefully polished by 31 years of never facing consequences. Gerald lifted the microphone again dramatically. At midnight, he said proudly, "I will officially pass Sears Meridian Group to my son, the one who actually earned it." The room erupted. Applause, whistles, champagne glasses clinking together. Someone near the stage shouted, "That's legacy right there." God, legacy. My father loved that word almost as much as he loved Colton. Nathan's fingers tightened slightly around mine beneath the table. Tiny movement. Question without words, "You okay?" I squeezed back once. Yes, or at least close enough. Because here's the thing nobody in that ballroom understood yet. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger burns hot, messy, visible. What I felt was colder than that. Certain. The countdown clock projected across the ballroom wall read, 11:58 p.m., 2 minutes left. 2 minutes before my father proudly handed a publicly traded company to the son he spent 30 years protecting. And 2 minutes before federal investigators received the final piece proving both of them committed securities fraud. Funny timing. Before I tell you what happened at midnight, subscribe and comment where you're watching from. And if you've ever watched someone take credit for work you sacrificed your life building, this story is for you. To understand my family, you have to understand Sears Meridian Group. My grandfather, Hank Sears, built a small trucking company in North Carolina during the 1970s. 3 trucks, 2 mechanics, constant debt. According to my father, Hank lost most of it after his daughters sold the business when he died. No son to carry the name. That story became family scripture. Gerald Sears repeated it constantly while I grew up. "A son protects the legacy," he'd say. "A daughter carries the memories." Interesting phrase considering I carried the company financially for almost a decade. Sears Meridian became a logistics and manufacturing firm when my father expanded it during the 90s. By the time I graduated from Wharton, the company was publicly traded. $380 million market cap, 230 employees, 4 facilities across 2 states. And me, I joined as an intern at 26 years old, not because Gerald offered me a position. Because I applied anonymously through HR. Funny detail, my father liked telling people his daughter wanted independence. Truth was, I learned very young not to expect opportunities inside my own family. Within 2 years, I rebuilt the company's internal audit infrastructure from scratch. Within 5, I restructured $47 million of short-term debt during a liquidity crisis that nearly collapsed payroll. Nobody outside finance fully understood how close Sears Meridian came to disaster that year. I did, because I spent 4 months sleeping inside my office running cash flow projections while Colton attended networking retreats in Scottsdale. The board praised executive leadership afterward. The next day, my father bought Colton a new Porsche. That was the Sears family in one sentence. I became vice president of finance at 32, youngest VP in company history. Colton joined the company 3 years ago, vice president of business development, corner office, executive assistant, corporate credit card, no measurable deliverables, no accountability, just confidence. God. Colton weaponized confidence like it was a professional skill. At trade shows, people loved him. Expensive suits, easy smile, firm handshake. Meanwhile, I sat in conference rooms reviewing debt exposure reports at 2 a.m., making sure 230 employees still had retirement contributions processed correctly. Guess which work received applause? Exactly. My office sat beside the server room on the 3rd floor. Not glamorous, but honestly, I loved it there. The low hum of servers vibrating softly through the walls at night, the quiet click of keyboards, the glow of spreadsheets at 6:30 in the morning before anyone else arrived, that felt real to me. Stable numbers made sense, people rarely did. Every audit trail in that company ran through my department. Vendor payments, payroll cycles, quarterly SEC filings, revenue recognition. I reviewed everything personally because I couldn't stop myself. Perfectionism isn't ambition. It's anxiety wearing a productivity disguise. Nathan used to tell me that. He was probably right. My mother Diane called it overworking. Your brother knows how to delegate, she'd say over the phone. You should learn from him. Interesting advice considering Colton delegated work that barely existed. But in my mother's world, confidence looked like leadership, and quiet competence looked obsessive. I stopped arguing with Diane about Colton years ago. Nothing changed anyway. She'd just lower her voice softly and say the sentence designed to end every conversation. Don't make this harder than it has to be. God, that sentence followed me my entire life. Then came Thanksgiving. 14 months before the New Year's Eve party. And honestly, that dinner changed everything. Thanksgiving at the Sears house always looked perfect from the outside. Long walnut dining table, imported wine. My mother's antique silver polished until it reflected the chandelier light. The kind of family dinner people imagine wealthy families must have constantly. Elegant, controlled, emotionally freezing. That year it was just 6 of us, my parents. Colton, Colton's girlfriend Lauren, Nathan, and me. 6 people seated around a table designed for 12. Too much empty space. Funny considering how crowded the room still felt emotionally. My mother moved around the dining room adjusting napkins unnecessarily while Gerald poured bourbon like he was preparing for a board meeting instead of Thanksgiving dinner. Nathan sat beside me steady as always, one hand resting lightly against my chair whenever conversations shifted toward dangerous territory, which in my family was often. Dinner started normally enough, football playing faintly from the living room. My mother asking Lauren about wedding venues. Colton talking loudly about a conference in Atlanta where apparently everyone loved his vision for expansion. God, Colton loved that word too, vision. People use vague business words when they have no measurable accomplishments underneath them. Then halfway through dinner, Gerald set down his fork and cleared his throat. And instantly the entire table changed, because everyone knew that sound. Announcement mode. I want to discuss the transition plan, he said calmly. There it was. Nathan's fingers touched my knee beneath the table immediately, grounding, supportive, like he already knew exactly where this conversation would go. Gerald leaned back in his chair proudly. By spring, Colton will begin transitioning into co-CEO responsibilities. Lauren smiled instantly. My mother looked relieved. Colton tried to act modest for approximately 3 seconds before failing completely. Dad, no, Gerald interrupted proudly. You earned it. Earned it. Interesting choice of words. Because earlier that same week, I stayed in the office until 11:40 p.m. fixing a vendor reconciliation discrepancy that would have affected quarterly reporting. Colton spent that evening at a steakhouse posting cigar photos on Instagram. But sure, earned it. Gerald continued talking like the decision was already historical fact. By January next year, the board will finalize the handoff officially. Smooth, confident, permanent, no discussion. No evaluation process. No succession review, just inheritance disguised as leadership. I set down my wineglass carefully. Have you considered forming a succession committee? Silence. Tiny at first, then heavy. Gerald blinked once. A what? An independent review committee, I clarified calmly. Board oversight, candidate evaluation, operational benchmarking. This isn't a corporate search, Gerald interrupted sharply. God, there it was, that tone. The one reserved specifically for moments when I became inconvenient publicly. This is family. Interesting, because family in the Sears household always seemed to benefit exactly one child. Colton leaned back, smiling faintly beside Lauren. He didn't say anything. Didn't need to. My mother touched my arm lightly beneath the table. Soft pressure. Warning. Don't make this harder than it has to be, Diane said quietly. There it was again. Family slogan. Translation, stop noticing unfair things out loud. Nathan stayed completely silent beside me, not passive. Strategic. He understood something important about my family very early. They treated disagreement like disrespect. I picked up my fork again slowly, ate one bite of casserole. Let the conversation move on, outwardly calm. Internally, something shifted permanently that night. Not because Gerald chose Colton, honestly, I expected that already. No, what stayed with me afterward were the numbers. Specifically, Colton's quarterly vendor acquisition reports. His division had just posted record contract growth that quarter, 12 new vendor relationships. Projected revenue increase 19%. On paper, it looked extraordinary, too extraordinary. That's the thing about financial systems. Most fraud doesn't begin with missing money. It begins with numbers that look slightly too perfect. The following Monday morning, I arrived at the office at 6:27 a.m. Parking lot empty except for security. Same routine, same elevators, same server hum vibrating faintly through the floor beside my office wall. I opened Colton's quarterly acquisition reports while the building still sat dark around me. 12 new vendor contracts. Silence, not shocked silence, processing silence. Nathan pulled out the chair across from me and sat carefully. How bad? I don't know yet. True, at that point I still didn't understand how deep it went. Only that something beneath Colton's numbers felt rotten. That weekend, our dining room disappeared beneath documents. Wire records spread across one side, vendor registrations across the other, contract signatures in the center. Nathan stood at the edge of the table reading upside down while I highlighted transfer patterns. The kitchen lights stayed on until almost 2 in the morning. Finally, Nathan tapped one Delaware registration form with one finger. Shell company, I looked up immediately. You think so too, Evelyn? He pointed toward the registration address. P.O. box, no operational listing, no employee records, no public footprint. Then quietly, this isn't a vendor, God. Hearing someone else say it out loud changed everything. Because suspicion still leaves room for denial. Confirmation doesn't. Nathan sat down beside the documents carefully. Do you know the name David Morrill? I scanned the registration form again. No, but interesting. Nathan always heard the part people avoided saying. I pulled another printout toward us. Colton attended a logistics conference in Atlanta 14 months ago. Nathan frowned slightly. And I checked the attendee registry. I slid the page across the table. Booth 17. David Morrill, Greystone Industrial Supply, directly adjacent to Colton's booth. Nathan leaned back slowly. Oh, exactly. Oh, the room suddenly felt smaller. He rubbed one hand across his jaw thoughtfully before speaking again. If these payments are fraudulent, his voice stayed careful. Then Sears Meridian filed materially inaccurate financial disclosures. I stared at him. Public company, quarterly filings, investor reports, SEC disclosures, God. It wasn't internal fraud anymore, it was securities fraud. Nathan exhaled quietly. And if Gerald knows, he didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to, because suddenly the worst possibility sat silently between us at the kitchen table. My father. I stood up abruptly and walked toward the window over the sink. Outside, rain slid down the glass in long, distorted lines. I can't take this to Gerald. Nathan stayed quiet behind me because he already knew why. My father spent 30 years protecting Colton from consequences. If I brought him evidence privately, it would disappear. Quietly, permanently, and maybe so would I professionally. Then don't, Nathan said softly. I turned around slowly. What? Don't bring it to Gerald? Simple, direct. Nathan folded his hands carefully. You bring it somewhere they can't bury it. The SEC, the idea hit instantly. Cold, terrifying, logical, God, even thinking it felt impossible. You're talking about whistleblowing against my own family? No, Nathan corrected calmly. I'm talking about protecting 230 employees from executive fraud. Silence, heavy silence. Because deep down, I knew he was right. Nathan stood and walked toward me slowly. Evelyn, if this collapses later without documentation, the employees lose everything first. Retirement accounts, payroll stability, stock value. Healthcare, not Gerald, not Colton, the people who actually depended on the company functioning honestly. Nathan rested both hands lightly against my arms. If you go through proper channels, there are protections. Dodd-Frank. SEC whistleblower protections, confidential reporting structures, systems designed specifically for moments like this. I laughed once quietly, not amused, exhausted. My entire life, I whispered, I kept believing if I worked hard enough, eventually my father would see me clearly. Nathan's expression softened immediately, and I looked back toward the documents spread across our dining table. Greystone, wire transfers, Colton's signatures, then quietly answered, he saw me clearly the whole time. God, that realization hurt worse than the fraud itself, because it meant Gerald Sears didn't overlook me accidentally. He chose Colton anyway, not despite incompetence, because of bloodline. A son carries the name. Family scripture again. Nathan stepped closer. What are you going to do? I stared at the kitchen clock. 11:14 p.m. Then slowly walked back toward the dining table and opened my laptop. The SEC whistleblower portal took less than 30 seconds to load. White screen, blue government header, submission fields, cold, official, permanent. My hands shook slightly while I typed. Company, Sears Meridian Group, alleged violations, fraudulent vendor structuring, material misrepresentation, potential securities violations. Then came the hard part, details. I spent nearly 2 hours writing everything carefully. Greystone entities, payment thresholds, shell registrations, Colton's approvals, every sentence precise, emotionless. That mattered, not because I lacked emotion. Because evidence survives where anger gets dismissed. Finally, at 11:47 p.m., I attached the scanned documents. My cursor hovered over the submit button for nearly 30 full seconds. One click, that was all. One click, and there would be no taking it back. Nathan appeared beside me silently, not pressuring, not persuading, just present, steady, safe. I clicked submit. The confirmation screen appeared instantly. Tip accepted. Reference number assigned. My phone buzzed softly beside the laptop seconds later. Confirmation email received. I stared at the screen while my entire life quietly divided into before and after. Then Nathan reached over and closed the laptop gently. And for the first time in 14 months, I finally stopped trying to save my family from themselves. Monday morning, I walked into Sears Meridian at 6:30 a.m. exactly like always. Same parking space. Same security guard nodding half awake from the night shift. Same hum from the server room vibrating faintly through the walls beside my office. Externally, nothing changed. Internally, everything had. Because somewhere outside my father's control, federal investigators now possessed evidence against his company. Funny thing about secrets? Once another person knows them, they stop belonging entirely to the people hiding them. I sat down at my desk and opened the quarterly financial reports Gerald requested for the board meeting. Revenue projections, vendor reconciliation, SEC disclosure footnotes, every number perfect. That mattered to me. People assume whistleblowers act out of revenge, but honestly, I still loved the company, the real company. Not Gerald's ego, not Colton's inheritance fantasy. The employees, the systems, the people whose paychecks depended on financial truth. So I kept doing my job exactly the same way I always had, maybe even better. At 8:12 a.m., Pam appeared at my office door carrying coffee and a stack of vendor approvals. Pam had worked with me for 6 years, efficient, sharp, impossible to fool. You were here late Friday, she said casually. I know, she set the coffee down carefully. You okay? Interesting question, because Pam didn't ask emotional things lightly. I looked at her for 1 second too long, and I think part of her understood something serious had shifted already. I'm fine, I answered. Technically true, I wasn't panicking anymore, that surprised me most. The fear faded almost immediately after filing. What replaced it felt colder, focused. Over the next several weeks, I built a second file. Private, offline, encrypted, every Greystone transaction logged separately, every payment authorization mapped, every internal email archived. The company servers hummed quietly through the walls late at night while I worked alone beneath fluorescent lights organizing evidence against my own family. God, sometimes that still feels surreal. At the annual holiday party, Gerald stood beside a decorated Christmas tree holding another champagne glass. Of course, my father treated champagne like a management strategy. To another record year, he announced proudly. Employees applauded politely around the cafeteria. Colton stood beside him laughing too loudly while Lauren took photos for social media. Perfect executive family image. I held my own glass, smiled when expected, said nothing. Nathan once told me something important about powerful people. They mistake silence for surrender. He was right. 3 months after my original submission, the SEC responded. Not by phone, not formally, through the encrypted whistleblower portal. An investigator had been assigned. Preliminary review initiated. Requesting supplemental documentation. My stomach tightened immediately reading the message. Not fear, validation, because suddenly this wasn't theoretical anymore. Someone believed the evidence mattered, the investigator requested. Vendor onboarding records, internal approval workflows, accounts payable communications, executive authorization chains. I had all of it, every piece, because I built the audit system myself. That's the irony nobody in my family understood. Gerald trusted me with the infrastructure because he never imagined I'd use competence against them. Over the next month, I compiled a second submission, this one far more detailed. Wire transfer logs, internal routing records, assistant approvals, cross-referenced vendor structures. Nathan sat on the couch reading while I uploaded documents late Sunday evening. Done, he asked quietly. Second batch, how much more do they need? I stared at the progress bar finishing across the screen. Probably executive-level knowledge. Nathan lowered his book immediately, meaning proof Gerald knew. God. That possibility sat between us silently for several seconds. Because there's a difference between protecting your son blindly and actively participating. I didn't want to believe my father crossed that line, even then. At work, Gerald announced a company-wide town hall titled, "The Future of Sears Meridian." Everyone knew what that meant. Succession. Pam placed the calendar invite on my desk carefully. Should I clear your schedule afterward? I looked up. Why? She hesitated, then quietly, because this feels bigger than a normal meeting. Interesting, even employees sensed the atmosphere changing. The town hall filled the main conference room completely, standing room only. Gerald loved audience moments. Projector screen, stage lighting, corporate banners. And at the center of the opening slide, a giant photo of Colton smiling in an expensive suit like a magazine advertisement for inherited wealth. Gerald spoke for 20 minutes about legacy, always legacy. The early years, the company's growth, the importance of family leadership. Then finally, every great company needs a successor who understands not only numbers but people. God. Interesting statement considering Colton barely understood spreadsheets. Gerald turned toward my brother proudly. I am proud to announce that my son, Colton Sears, will officially begin transitioning into co-CEO responsibilities this spring. Polite applause filled the room. Not enthusiastic, not cold, corporate applause. The kind people give because they know they're supposed to. Colton stepped up to the podium next. Perfectly rehearsed speech, thanking employees, thanking the board, thanking Gerald. Not once mentioning me, not once mentioning the finance department that kept the company operational during crisis years. Funny, even his gratitude inherited blind spots. Afterward, Pam closed my office door behind her quietly. He didn't say your name. I kept reviewing spreadsheets without looking up. I noticed. You rebuilt the audit infrastructure. Pam, you saved payroll during the liquidity crisis. I finally looked at her then. Sharp, loyal, angry on my behalf. Interesting how strangers defended my work more than my own family ever did. I know what I contributed, I said softly. And honestly, for the first time in my life, I finally meant it. That evening, my mother called. Of course she did. Diane Sears had a strange instinct for contacting me immediately after moments where I'd been publicly diminished, almost like she could sense disappointment through walls. "Wasn't the town hall wonderful?" she asked brightly. God, bright voices are dangerous in families like mine. They usually arrive right before manipulation. "Your brother looked so presidential." Presidential. Interesting word, considering Colton struggled to finish monthly reporting summaries without his assistant rewriting them. I leaned back slowly in my office chair, staring at the dark server room through the glass wall beside my desk. He looked rehearsed. Tiny silence, then, "Evelyn," just my name, flat, controlled, warning disguised as concern. My mother perfected that tone over decades. The conversation ended 6 minutes later, exactly the same way every difficult conversation with Diane ended. With me emotionally exhausted and her technically never saying anything openly cruel enough to confront directly. That was her talent. Soft control. Gerald dominated rooms loudly. Diane managed people quietly, honestly. She was harder to resist. By May, the SEC investigation intensified. The secure portal updated regularly now. Status, active under review. Request, additional executive documentation. Meaning, they still needed proof tying Gerald directly to the scheme. I knew it too. Without executive knowledge, Gerald could still claim ignorance. Colton becomes reckless. Finance misses irregularities. Father blindsided. Messy but survivable. But if Gerald knew, everything changed. That possibility sat heavily in my chest every single day afterward. Then came Thursday night, late May, most of the building emptied by 6 o'clock. I stayed behind finishing quarterly vendor reconciliations while rain hammered softly against the office windows. Gerald was away at a golf fundraiser in Hilton Head, wouldn't return until Monday. The building felt strangely hollow without executive noise echoing through the hallways, just fluorescent lights, air conditioning hum, server vibrations beneath the floor. I needed the original vendor master file, not digital copies. Originals, Gerald kept physical contracts locked inside a filing cabinet behind his desk because, according to him, paper doesn't crash. Old-fashioned paranoia, useful paranoia. I stood outside his office for nearly 30 seconds before going inside. Dark carpet, leather chairs, family photos positioned carefully beside awards. Interesting detail, there were 7 framed photos of Colton in that office. One of me, I already knew where the key was. Top right desk drawer, hidden behind a box of monogrammed pens from Gerald's 50th birthday. I'd seen him retrieve it hundreds of times over the years. The brass key felt heavier than expected in my hand. Worn edges, scratches near the handle, evidence of repetition. I unlocked the cabinet slowly. 3rd folder from the front, vendor contracts, current year inside, 12 vendor files. The 6th folder, GREYSTONE industrial supply. My pulse started climbing immediately. I opened it carefully. Original contract. Colton's signature. Countersignature, David Morrill. Terms, logistics consulting services, deliverables. Vaguely defined. Payment structure, monthly retainers, nothing overtly illegal, but honestly, that was the point. Fraud survives by looking ordinary at first glance. I photographed every page carefully with my phone. Front, back, attachments. Wire instructions, 17 images total. Then I returned everything exactly how I found it. Same folder position, same drawer angle, same locked cabinet, key back behind the pens. No trace. When I walked back through the empty hallway afterward, my hands shook slightly for the first time in months. Not fear exactly. Certainty, because now the contracts existed outside Gerald's control permanently. At home, Nathan looked up from the kitchen table immediately when I walked in. "You found something?" Not a question. I handed him my phone silently. He scrolled through the photographs slowly. Contract pages reflecting softly across his glasses. Then finally, consulting services with no deliverables. "Exactly." Nathan exhaled through his nose quietly. "This is structured intentionally." God, that phrase mattered. Intentionally. Not incompetence, not oversight, design. Nathan handed the phone back carefully. "You need someone else to see this." "What do you mean?" "Someone inside the board structure." Interesting, because I already knew exactly who he meant. Helen Ostrowski, retired CFO, board member. One of the only people at Sears Meridian who ever treated me like an executive instead of Gerald's daughter. Helen had mentored me quietly for years, monthly coffee meetings, financial strategy conversations, career advice, no theatrics, no favoritism, just respect. The following Tuesday, I met Helen at a cafe off campus like always. Rain streaked softly against the windows while she stirred tea with one hand and reviewed earnings reports with the other. Helen never wasted time pretending not to work. I respected that deeply. Halfway through coffee, I finally asked, "Have you ever seen vendor contracts that didn't make sense?" Helen stopped stirring immediately, then slowly lowered her spoon. "Once." I held completely still. "What happened?" "I brought concerns to the board." And Helen smiled without humor. A subcommittee formed. 2 meetings later, the contracts were reclassified as consulting agreements and nobody mentioned them again. God, my stomach tightened. She looked at me carefully over reading glasses hanging from a silver chain. "Is this about Greystone?" Silence. Absolute silence. I think my coffee cup literally froze halfway to my mouth. Helen leaned back calmly. "I've been reading financial statements longer than you've been alive, Evelyn. Not arrogant. Just factual. I noticed the payment structures months ago. 3 entities, 1 receiving account, transfers below threshold reporting, exactly what I saw." "Why didn't you say anything?" I whispered. Helen's expression softened slightly. "Because the last time I spoke inside those walls, I learned something important." "What?" "That powerful families protect blood before truth." God, that sentence landed hard, because deep down I already knew it. Helen picked up her tea again carefully. "But you have something I didn't have." I frowned slightly. "What?" She held my gaze steadily. "Access." After that conversation with Helen, I stopped doubting myself completely. That mattered more than I expected. Because for months, part of me still wondered if I was overreacting somehow, if exhaustion or resentment distorted what I saw. But Helen noticed the same patterns independently. 3 entities. 1 receiving account, structured payments, not paranoia, fraud. The 3rd SEC submission happened in June. And honestly, that was the moment everything became irreversible. The first 2 submissions contained numbers. This one contained faces. I uploaded the original Greystone contracts, David Morrell's Delaware registrations, conference records linking Morrell and Colton directly, and high-resolution images of Colton's signatures across multiple vendor agreements. The secure portal confirmed upload receipt immediately. 3 days later, the investigator responded. "The documentation is substantial. We are building a formal enforcement file." God. I stared at that sentence for nearly a full minute. Formal enforcement file? Not preliminary review anymore, not hypothetical. Real. Then came the next line: "We require evidence of executive-level knowledge or direction." Executive-level knowledge, meaning Gerald. The room suddenly felt colder. Because proving my brother committed fraud was one thing. Proving my father knowingly protected it, that destroyed everything permanently. I sat with that reality for an entire week. Not because I believed Gerald innocent. Because once I confirmed it, I could never emotionally uncross that line again. Then Gerald invited me to lunch, just the 2 of us. That almost never happened. Downtown steakhouse, private booth. Bourbon already waiting when I arrived. My father looked relaxed, pleased with himself. The way men look when they believe history is unfolding exactly according to their design. "I know the succession transition has been difficult for you," he said casually while cutting steak. Interesting opening. Not unfair, not painful, difficult, like I was struggling emotionally with something reasonable. I kept my expression neutral. "I'm managing," Gerald nodded approvingly. "You've always been disciplined." God, that word again, disciplined. My father praised me the way corporations praise infrastructure: useful, reliable. Invisible unless broken. He sipped bourbon slowly before continuing. "You've contributed more to this company than most people realize." There it was, the closest Gerald Sears ever came to emotional honesty, not gratitude. Acknowledgement, tiny difference. But passing the company to Colton, he leaned back carefully, is what's right for the family. Interesting, because family in Gerald's vocabulary always somehow aligned perfectly with male inheritance. I studied him quietly across the table. The man who built an empire while systematically overlooking the daughter who protected it financially. Did he really believe Colton earned this? Or did Gerald simply need to believe bloodline mattered more than competence? Maybe both. I understand, I answered calmly, and honestly, I did not approval understanding. Gerald needed a son carrying his name into the future more than he needed the most qualified successor. Legacy mattered more than merit. That realization stopped hurting eventually. It just became truth. After lunch, Gerald shook my hand before leaving the restaurant. Actually shook my hand, not hugged, not embraced, professional courtesy, like we were executives finalizing a deal instead of father and daughter. Funny detail. That night, I sat awake beside Nathan in bed staring at the ceiling fan turning slowly overhead. "He knows something," I whispered finally. Nathan looked over immediately. "You think Gerald's involved?" "I think Gerald protects Colton automatically." Silence. Then quietly, "That's not the same thing." No, it wasn't, and deep down I knew it. The following month gave me the answer. August, Wednesday evening. 7:04 p.m. Gerald was in New York meeting investors. The office nearly empty again. Motion sensor hallway lights flickering on one section at a time as I walked toward his office. Same brass key. Same drawer behind the monogrammed pens. I unlocked the cabinet carefully. This time I wasn't searching vendor contracts. I was searching Gerald himself. Inside the cabinet sat another folder I remembered noticing previously but never opening. CS, vendor review CS, Colton Sears. My pulse started pounding instantly. I opened the folder, 4 pages, email chain. Subject line, REGREYSTONE, handle quietly God. Even now those words still make my stomach tighten. The first email came from Colton. "Dad, Greystone invoice for Q3 is ready. Dave says he needs the wire by Friday." Simple, direct, familiar, then Gerald's reply underneath. "I have reviewed the arrangement. The numbers work for the quarter. Make sure invoicing stays below reporting thresholds. I will handle board questions." I read it once, twice, 3 times, not because I misunderstood. Because my brain kept trying to reject what my eyes already confirmed. Gerald knew, not suspected, not ignored accidentally. Knew, worse, he directed it. The room suddenly felt unbearably silent around me. Just the soft hum of air conditioning. My heart beat. Gerald's words glowing from printed paper beneath fluorescent light. "I will handle board questions," like fraud was an administrative inconvenience. Like manipulating financial disclosures was just another executive task between meetings. God, I think something inside me broke permanently in that moment, not dramatically, quietly. Like a final thread snapping after years of tension. I photographed every page carefully. Hands perfectly steady now. Interesting how certainty removes fear. Then I returned everything exactly where I found it. Folder position. Cabinet locked. Key behind the pens. When I finally reached the parking lot, rain had started again. Heavy this time. I sat inside my car gripping the steering wheel while water hammered the windshield hard enough to blur the entire world outside. Then suddenly, I started laughing. Not because anything felt funny. Because after 34 years of trying desperately to earn Gerald Sears' respect, I finally understood something devastating. My father never wanted a worthy successor. He wanted a son. I submitted Gerald's emails to the SEC that weekend. No hesitation anymore. No emotional conflict left to untangle, just process. The secure portal accepted the files immediately. Confirmation number updated. Case status changed. Formal enforcement review active. God, that sentence felt strangely calm, like reaching the center of a storm after months of noise. Nathan read the update over my shoulder quietly. "This is it," he said. Yeah, this was it. Because Gerald's emails changed everything legally. Without them, Colton looked like a reckless executive hiding fraudulent vendor payments. With them, the CEO himself became part of the scheme. Executive knowledge, intentional concealment. Structured fraud, not survivable. September drifted into October while the investigation continued silently beneath the surface of my family's life. And honestly, that was the strangest part. Nobody knew. Gerald still hosted board dinners. Colton still strutted through hallways like a future Forbes cover story. My mother still talked about legacy during Sunday phone calls like she was narrating royal succession. Meanwhile, federal investigators quietly built a case against all of them. At the office, Colton began redecorating Gerald's corner office before the transition even became official. New desk, new shelves, custom nameplate. Colton SEARS CEO God. The arrogance almost impressed me. Every morning I walked past that office on the way to the server room. Every single morning. And every single morning I imagined federal agents carrying those office computers out in evidence boxes. Interesting motivation? The October board meeting finalized the succession timeline. Formal CEO transfer, January 1st. Announcement to shareholders scheduled for December. Public transition event. New Year's Eve gala at the estate. Of course, Gerald wanted theatrics. Champagne, legacy speeches, public celebration. My father treated succession like a coronation ceremony. The board voted 5 in favor, 2 against. Helen Ostrowski voted no. She never explained why. Didn't need to. I abstained due to conflict of interest policy. Officially, family connection. Unofficially, I already knew the company they were voting to hand Colton no longer existed safely. After the meeting, I sat alone in my car in the parking garage for almost 15 minutes before starting the engine. Nathan called while rain tapped softly against the windshield. How'd it go? 5-2. Silence. They approved it, January 1st. Nathan exhaled quietly, then, what do you need now? Interesting question, not how do you feel, what do you need? God, I loved him for that. One more contract? What kind? Something recent? Fresh proof, ongoing activity, current fraud, not historical misconduct, active misconduct. Because if the scheme still operated during succession planning, the SEC could move faster and harder. And honestly, I knew Colton would sign something before year-end. He always pushed aggressive vendor deals during Q4. Appearance mattered to him more than operational reality. By November, it happened. 3 days before Thanksgiving. A purchase order landed on my desk routed through standard approval channels. Vendor, Greystone Logistics Solutions amount, $890,000 category. Logistics consulting services. I stared at the document for several seconds without moving. Almost $900,000, the largest Greystone payment yet. Company policy required VP finance approval for any vendor payment above $500,000. Meaning, Colton needed my authorization. Interesting irony. The woman Gerald excluded from succession still controlled the signatures, keeping his son's fraud operational. The routing slip sat on my desk for over an hour. I reviewed it carefully, clinical, detached. Like studying an X-ray revealing damage already beyond repair. Then finally, I signed it. Not because I approved morally, because refusing would trigger internal questions before the SEC was ready to act. And because this contract mattered enormously, fresh signature, fresh authorization, fresh fraud, proof the scheme remained active right before succession transfer. Colton never even noticed my approval personally. His assistant routed everything through standard workflow. To him, I was infrastructure, background process. God, that detail still amazes me. My family underestimated me so completely they forgot I could see everything. That evening, I scanned the contract, the routing slip, the wire authorization, my approval signature, Colton's authorization chain. Then uploaded all of it through the secure portal labeled Supplemental Documentation, Active Transaction. When the upload finished, I stared at the screen quietly. The file was complete now. Shell company registrations, wire records, fraudulent vendor structures, Gerald's emails, current contracts, everything. Nathan texted while I closed the laptop. Done, I replied with one word, yes. No celebration, no dramatic emotion, just completion. 14 months of documentation, 14 months of silence. 14 months of pretending nothing changed while building a federal fraud case against my own family. And now, all that remained was timing. December arrived wrapped in gold lights and succession speeches. The company released formal transition announcements publicly. Industry magazines praised Gerald's family-centered leadership model. God, if only they knew. My mother hosted holiday dinners discussing Colton's future like he was inheriting a kingdom instead of walking toward federal investigation. And through all of it, I stayed quiet. That's the thing people misunderstand most about revenge. The loudest person rarely holds the most power. Sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one saying almost nothing at all. The New Year's Eve gala took 6 months to plan. Because Gerald Sears didn't throw parties, he staged narratives. The estate outside Charlotte looked like something from a luxury magazine that night. Valet lines stretching down the driveway. Crystal chandeliers glowing through floor-to-ceiling windows. Ice sculptures shaped like the company logo. God, nothing says financial integrity quite like decorative frozen branding at a fraud-funded succession party. 140 guests attended. Board members, investors, local politicians, executives, their spouses, everyone important enough to witness Gerald's legacy moment publicly. Nathan adjusted my black evening gown carefully before we entered the ballroom. You ready? Interesting question, because emotionally, no, but strategically, absolutely, I smiled faintly. I've been ready for 14 months. The ballroom hummed with expensive conversation. Champagne servers weaving between tables, jazz band playing near the stage, Colton laughing loudly near the investor group like he already owned the company officially. Lauren stood beside him wearing a diamond bracelet Gerald probably paid for indirectly through fraudulent vendor transfers. Funny thought, Helen Ostrowski arrived 30 minutes later, dark green gown, sharp eyes. Same calm expression she carried into every board meeting. She stopped beside me briefly near the bar. Big night, she said quietly. Apparently. Helen studied the ballroom for one long second, then softly. You did the right thing. God, that mattered more than she probably realized. Because despite everything, part of me still grieved the family underneath the fraud. Helen touched my arm lightly before moving toward the board table. No dramatics, no further discussion, just acknowledgement. Nathan leaned beside me once she left. She knows enough. At 11:20 p.m., Gerald requested everyone move toward the ballroom stage for the official transition announcement. Of course he did. My father loved audience control. Guests gathered near the front carrying fresh champagne flutes while photographers positioned themselves strategically around the stage. The band lowered their music volume. Spotlights brightened. And suddenly Gerald Sears stood center stage exactly where he always believed he belonged. Microphone in one hand, champagne in the other, legacy embodied. My friends, he announced warmly. Applause immediately. God. People really will applaud anyone holding a microphone confidently in formal wear. Gerald smiled proudly across the ballroom. 30 years ago, Sears Meridian began with one delivery truck and a dream. Here we go. The founding mythology speech. He talked about sacrifice, growth, family leadership, tradition, every word polished from repetition. Then finally, he turned toward Colton. My son, applause already started before Gerald even continued. The one who actually earned this responsibility. Interesting, because at that exact moment, federal investigators already possessed 18 months of fraudulent contracts, shell company documentation, wire transfers, and Gerald's own email instructing Colton to keep payments below reporting thresholds. Earned it, sure. Colton stepped onto the stage beside him, smiling like a man about to inherit an empire. And honestly, that's the part I remember most clearly, not arrogance, confidence, real confidence. Because neither of them believed consequences could ever truly reach them. The countdown clock appeared across the ballroom projector. 11:58 p.m. 2 minutes. Nathan found my hand beneath the table immediately. Steady pressure. You okay? I looked toward the stage. Gerald shaking investor hands. Colton accepting congratulations. Champagne reflecting gold across the ballroom lights. Then quietly answered yes. And for the first time all night, I actually meant it. My phone rested inside my clutch purse beside me. Final draft email prepared already. Recipient, SEC Enforcement Division attached. Supplemental timeline summary, cross-referenced executive documentation, December financial reconciliation, final explanatory statement. Not technically necessary, but symbolic matters sometimes. I wanted the final submission time-stamped exactly when Gerald publicly transferred the company. Midnight, poetic symmetry. 30 seconds before countdown, my mother approached the table. Diane Sears looked radiant in silver silk and generational denial. There you are, she said warmly. Nathan stood politely. I'm going to grab another drink. Translation, private family conversation detected. Smart man. Diane smiled toward the ballroom stage proudly. Your father's very emotional tonight. Interesting, Gerald had spent decades emotionally unavailable to almost everyone. But legacy ceremonies, those moved him deeply. I'm sure Diane looked at me carefully then, and suddenly for one brief second I think she sensed something, tiny shift in expression, instinct, maternal recognition. "What's wrong?" she asked quietly. "God." That question nearly broke me emotionally, because my mother spent 34 years ignoring most of my pain. And somehow tonight of all nights she noticed. I looked directly at her, perfect makeup, carefully controlled smile. Woman who spent decades teaching me silence preserved peace, then softly answered, "Nothing that isn't already happening." Confusion flickered across her face immediately. Before she could ask anything else, the ballroom erupted. 10, 9, 8. Guests raised champagne glasses toward the ceiling. Confetti cannons positioned near the stage. Band preparing for the midnight transition cue. Gerald wrapped one arm proudly around Colton's shoulders. 765. My phone already unlocked inside my hand beneath the tablecloth. SEC email draft glowing softly against the screen. 4-3. Nathan returned beside me silently. Found my hand again. 2. Gerald lifted his champagne high above the ballroom. TO Legacy. 1. Midnight exploded across the estate. Confetti cannons fired, champagne sprayed, music crashed through the ballroom. And while everyone celebrated Colton Sears becoming CEO, I pressed send. For exactly 11 seconds, nothing happened. That's important. People imagine instant chaos after moments like that. Alarms. Agents storming through doors, public arrests. No, real destruction usually arrives quietly first. The ballroom exploded with celebration around me. Confetti drifted through chandelier light. The band launched into some triumphant jazz arrangement. Investors crowded the stage, shaking Gerald's hand. And my father, he looked happier than I'd ever seen him. God, that part still hurts unexpectedly sometimes. Because underneath everything, the fraud, the favoritism, the lies, Gerald genuinely believed this moment represented success. Nathan leaned toward me carefully. "It's done?" I looked down at my empty email confirmation screen. "Sent successfully?" "Yes." One word, 14 months ending inside a single syllable. On stage, Colton lifted a champagne glass while photographers snapped pictures fast enough to blind people. To the future of Sears Meridian, more applause, more cheering. Interesting how quickly people celebrate narratives they don't actually understand. Then my phone buzzed, soft vibration against my palm, SEC portal notification. I opened it beneath the table discreetly. Supplemental materials received. Case status updated, escalated enforcement priority. God, that was fast, much faster than I expected. Nathan watched my face carefully. "What? They moved it to priority enforcement?" His eyebrows lifted immediately, meaning active action likely imminent. Across the ballroom, Helen Ostrowski looked directly toward me from the board table. Tiny pause, tiny nod. Not celebration, recognition. She knew, or at least she knew enough. The first crack appeared 23 minutes after midnight. I remember the exact timing because Gerald had just started another speech. Of course he did. My father could stretch recognition moments into entire theatrical productions. And as I looked toward the future of this company, one of the legal advisors approached the stage from the side entrance quickly. Too quickly, dark suit. Serious expression, phone pressed tightly against his palm. Interesting detail, corporate attorneys move differently when something catastrophic happens. Sharp, efficient, controlled panic. Gerald noticed him immediately. Annoyance flickered across his face. Nobody interrupted Gerald Sears publicly, especially not during legacy speeches. The attorney whispered something near the stage steps. I watched my father's expression change in real time. Confusion first, then irritation, then fear, real fear. God, I had never seen that look on Gerald before, not once in my life. The attorney handed him the phone. Gerald read something on the screen silently. Color drained from his face immediately. Colton stepped closer. "What?" Gerald ignored him completely. Interesting, because powerful men only ignore golden suns when something bigger than ego enters the room. The ballroom energy shifted subtly. People stopped talking as loudly. Investors exchanged glances. The band awkwardly lowered volume without instructions. Nathan's hand tightened around mine. "Is this it?" I looked toward the stage. Gerald now speaking aggressively with two attorneys near the curtains. Colton visibly confused beside him, board members standing slowly from tables. Then my phone buzzed again, this time Helen, one text message. Federal inquiry notice delivered to board counsel. They know, God, my heart actually skipped. Because suddenly the thing I spent 14 months building quietly became real publicly. Across the ballroom, Gerald grabbed the microphone again abruptly. Ladies and gentlemen, his voice sounded different now, tighter, controlled too carefully. There appears to be a minor legal matter requiring immediate executive attention. Minor legal matter. Interesting phrase for federal securities fraud investigation. Murmurs spread instantly through the crowd. Investors whispering, board members checking phones, spouses pretending not to notice tension. Colton stepped toward Gerald, visibly frustrated. What's happening? Gerald hissed something at him quietly. And honestly, that might have been the first time in Colton's entire life someone spoke to him without protection. Because his face changed immediately. The confidence vanished, just gone like watching expensive glass shatter. One investor near the front finally asked the question everyone wanted answered. Gerald, what legal matter? Silence, heavy silence. My father stood frozen for half a second too long. That was the mistake, not the fraud, hesitation. Because confident executives don't freeze publicly unless the situation is catastrophic. Then suddenly phones started buzzing everywhere. One after another, board members, legal teams, investors. The SEC inquiry notice had reached corporate counsel formally, and once lawyers know, rooms change fast. Nathan leaned closer beside me. You should probably leave soon. Interesting advice. Because he understood something before I did. After tonight, the Sears family would stop being family privately. They'd become opposing sides publicly. Gerald looked out across the ballroom, desperately trying to regain control. My father spent 30 years mastering authority, but authority depends heavily on people believing you still have it. And for the first time in his life, Gerald Sears looked powerless. Then came the moment I'll never forget. Colton turned toward the crowd and shouted, "This is ridiculous, God." Panic destroyed his polish instantly. There's obviously some misunderstanding. Investors stared silently. Attorneys whispering urgently nearby. Board members checking legal messages. Champagne glasses abandoned untouched across tables. And suddenly the entire illusion collapsed. Not dramatically, not loudly, quietly, like rich people realizing in real time they attached themselves to the wrong narrative. Then Gerald's eyes found me across the ballroom, directly, and in that exact moment my father knew. I'll never forget the look on Gerald Sears' face when he realized it was me. Not rage, that came later. First came disbelief. Because my father genuinely could not imagine a world where his daughter moved against him strategically. Emotionally, maybe, but strategically, no. Gerald spent 34 years mistaking my silence for obedience. Across the ballroom, our eyes locked while investors whispered around him and attorneys argued quietly near the stage curtains. And suddenly, I watched the exact moment my father understood something devastating. The person who knew the company best was never Colton, it was me. Nathan stood slowly beside me. Evelyn, soft voice, grounding voice. Time to go, because the ballroom had shifted completely now. No more celebration, no more music, just panic hidden beneath expensive clothing. The band stopped playing entirely. Guests checked phones nervously. Board members clustered together, whispering in sharp, urgent bursts. And Gerald walked directly toward my table, not running, not yelling, controlled. That mattered to him. Even at the edge of collapse, Gerald Sears needed to appear powerful publicly. Colton followed several steps behind, looking pale for the first time in his adult life. Interesting transformation. Without confidence, my brother looked strangely young, almost fragile. Gerald stopped across from me beside the table. Did you do this? Straight to it, no denial, no confusion. God. That hurt more than if he'd accused me irrationally, because it meant part of him already knew I was capable. I looked up calmly. Yes. Silence, real silence. The kind so heavy you can hear people breathing nearby. Nathan remained standing beside me without speaking. Steady, present. Gerald stared at me like he'd never actually seen me clearly before. You reported the company, I reported fraud. Colton stepped forward instantly. This is insane. God, even then, even standing inside the consequences, he still sounded offended instead of ashamed. You're destroying everything. Interesting statement. Because people benefiting from corruption always blame the person exposing it instead of the corruption itself. I stood slowly from my chair, not dramatic, just deliberate. The company was already being destroyed. Gerald's jaw tightened immediately. You should have come to me. God, that sentence almost made me laugh. After 30 years of favoritism, after buried concerns, after a son carries the name. Come to him, you would have buried it, I answered quietly. And honestly, none of them denied it. Not Gerald, not Diane, not even Colton, because deep down they knew. My mother finally approached the table then, silver gown, perfect makeup. Completely shattered expression. Evelyn, God, hearing pain in Diane's voice nearly broke me unexpectedly, because despite everything, she was still my mother. Part of me would probably always grieve that. You could have talked to us, she whispered. Interesting, us? Families like mine always become us only when consequences arrive. I looked at her carefully. The woman who spent decades telling me not to make things harder than they had to be. Then softly answered, I tried my whole life to be heard in this family. Silence again, because what response exists to that? Gerald stepped closer, lowering his voice sharply. Do you understand what you've done? Yes, completely. More than he ever would. I protected the employees, I answered. The shareholders, the company. Then after a pause, someone had to. God, that landed. Because for one split second, I think my father finally saw the truth underneath everything. Not betrayal, responsibility. The same responsibility he praised constantly in public speeches while ignoring it inside his own daughter. Colton laughed suddenly, short, disbelieving, panicked. You think they'll make you CEO after this? Interesting. Even now, even here, my brother still thought this was about inheritance. Power, winning, that's the difference between us. Colton wanted ownership, I wanted accountability. I didn't do this to replace you, I said quietly. I did it because what you were doing was wrong. And honestly, that confused him more than anything else all night. Federal attorneys arrived 40 minutes later, not dramatic raids. Just dark suits, briefcases, quiet conversations. The board moved Gerald and Colton into a private conference room near the West Wing while guests started leaving early, pretending not to stare. Nathan and I walked outside before dawn. Cold January air. Empty champagne glasses abandoned near the garden railings. Confetti stuck to wet stone from melting snow. The estate looked exhausted. Like a stage after actors abandon the performance. I stood near the fountain watching sunrise slowly bleed gray across the horizon. Then Nathan wrapped his coat around my shoulders from behind. You okay? Interesting question. Because honestly, I didn't know yet. I felt relieved, heartbroken, free, grieving all at once. My father's going to hate me forever, I whispered. Nathan stayed quiet for a second, then softly, no. I turned slightly toward him. He's going to hate that you were right. God, that sentence stayed with me. 3 months later, Gerald Sears resigned as CEO under federal investigation. Colton stepped down the same week. The board launched an independent restructuring review. Greystone payments became public. Shareholders filed lawsuits. Financial media tore the company apart for months, but Sears Meridian survived. That's the important part. The employees kept their jobs. Payroll continued. Facilities stayed open. Because the fraud stopped before it buried the company completely, Helen Ostrowski became interim CEO during restructuring. And 6 months later, the board asked me to return as chief financial officer overseeing recovery operations. Not because I was Gerald's daughter, not because of pity, because I was qualified. Funny how powerful recognition feels when it finally arrives without favoritism attached. I accepted, on one condition, complete governance reform, independent oversight, external audit authority, transparent succession rules. No more inherited entitlement disguised as leadership. Helen approved every single one. I spoke to Diane once after everything, just once. Coffee shop, quiet afternoon, no lawyers, no reporters. My mother looked older, smaller somehow. She stirred tea for nearly 2 minutes before finally whispering, "Your father still says you betrayed the family." I stared out the cafe window silently, then answered with the truth I spent my entire life learning too late. Family shouldn't require silence to survive. Diane cried after that. First time I'd ever seen her cry for me instead of because of me. And honestly, that hurt almost more than everything else. Gerald never spoke to me again. But sometimes, late at night inside my office beside the familiar hum of the server room, I think about that countdown clock at the gala. 10, 9, 8. The moment everyone celebrated Colton Sears inheriting a company he never truly built. And the exact second his sister quietly ended the lie holding it together. Funny thing about legacy, people like my father think legacy means protecting the family name at any cost. But real legacy is protecting the people depending on that name, even when it means destroying the illusion surrounding it. Before you go, subscribe and comment. Do you think exposing family corruption is betrayal or responsibility? And remember, the most dangerous person in the room is usually the one everyone underestimated.